This is Professor Shakti Kumar and the chairperson of the CESP. So I would like to request the people who are wandering here and there in the outside of the hall, please come and enjoy the interaction session. So first of all, I would like to request Professor Arun Kumar to say something and to address our alumnus. Professor Arun Kumar, sir. CPC is here. Oh, sorry. I would like to request Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar to address us and share the experiences that he would like to say something. Thank you, sir. Sir, please.
So I suppose we are supposed to speak on that topic, isn't it?
Ah.
Huh?
I think this is not working.
Is this okay? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I suppose I shouldn't be thanking CESP for inviting me because by accident of history, I was in the first batch of the Economic Center to do an MA. So, but I'm delighted to be here and to recognize a number of people, not all, I must confess, but I hope I'll meet all of you all as we go along. As you know, the session is meant to be a panel on a rather wide topic, which is Indian economic policy, the way forward. Let me switch off my phone. That's a difficult topic to handle partly because of the fact that you're uncertain about the environment in which economic policy is going to evolve over the times to come, and there's always the pressure that to have to choose between being pragmatic in terms of trying to understand what is the kind of policy which can be implemented going forward, and what needs to be done given the situation in which we are currently. So given this kind of a wide canvas, I thought what I'll do is just start by making a few comments as a basis for some discussion, anchored on where we are at today. If we look at the Indian economy, besides the hype which surrounds the GDP growth rate, we know that we have the following at hand. First, of course, there is the crisis in the agrarian sector. This is unlike the crisis of the mid-1960s, in which the crisis was one of an inadequate level of production and supply relative to demand, resulting in inflation if you didn't have access to imports, particularly PL480 imports during that time. But whereas now what we're really talking about is an agrarian crisis in which there is adequate production and supply relative to demand, given, of course, the level of demand that there is in the economy. And really the crisis is one of the lack of viability of crop production, that you are in a situation in which, given where final product prices are relative to costs which are being incurred, you actually have a situation in which, while we are proud that we are not in a situation where, as it were, you're from ship to mouth, you face the fact that a large part of the population is engaged in an activity which actually is not particularly viable from the point of view of the relationship between prices and costs. The second, of course, is that there is the long-term failure that India has experienced despite the promise it had at the time of independence, which is the inadequate diversification of economic activity in favor of manufacturing. We know that manufacturing sector even today is something like 17% or 18% of GDP. Now that is extremely low compared to the levels of between 35 and 40%, which many other developing economies have reached. And therefore, the kind of advantages which come from diversification to manufacturing, because of the fact that there are significant barriers to entry increases in productivity in primary production, which there aren't in manufacturing, we've not been in a position to be able to exploit that in adequate measure. The third, of course, is that therefore we essentially have a process in which, because there are limits to agricultural involution, what we have is a premature diversification in favor of services. And this is in some sense helped conceal to a certain extent the implicit failure in the kind of things I'm mentioning. And it conceals because of the fact that there exists a small component of the services sector in India, a small component, particularly in terms of employment, which is supposed to be dynamic, partly because of the fact that we've been extremely successful in software and IT-enabled services, which is a fact. And in addition to that, there have been periods when essentially based on borrowing or deficit financing, the state has undertaken expenditure which results in an expansion of public services in education and health. Not adequate, but there is an expansion. And of course in public administration and defense. And the fourth challenge is that this whole strategy we know is essentially meant that there's been over a period of time an inadequate growth in employment and a huge increase in income and wealth inequality. So you're basically talking about a strategy which not merely is successful other than for certain GDP measures, but really is one in which you have which is extremely inegalitarian in terms of asset and income distribution. So this is the environment in which we are, and in that kind of an environment, what you essentially have is that because there are limits to agricultural involution, given the crisis in the agricultural sector, the surplus labor force, the underemployed and the unemployed, basically settle into an informal and services economy. So this is, in some sense, what we need to address. These are the major challenges, as it were, if you're talking about where we're going, what it is to go forward. Now, partly, all of this, in some sense, the attention got diverted from this to a certain extent because of the fact that there appeared to be this notion that you didn't, in some sense, need to have a significantly large domestic market. Particularly, this was the perception which set in around 85, but gathered momentum, of course, we know, after 1991. So the idea was that you essentially can use external markets as the stimulus for growth. And the basic idea was that if you undertake certain kinds of policy changes, which were the policy changes which have now, over a period of time, been implemented for the last three decades and more, you would automatically see a process by which India would get a foothold and expand its position in the international market, and that would provide the stimulus to growth. So that the absence of a large domestic market to be able to provide the basis for manufactured mass consumption demand, which allows for a diversification, where despite the fact that manufacturing is not so employment intensive, the rate of growth would be such that you would be in a position, and the spin-off effect such that you would be in a position to be able to not merely increase employment, but increase employment in more productive and formal sectors. So the question is, where are we now in terms of this position? And what we know is that there are sea changes which are occurring in the international system, which makes this assumption that you can use the external market as a stimulus for growth increasingly difficult to sustain. And this comes for a number of reasons. First, of course, because of this sort of experience where supply chains collapsed and then remained clogged for a long period of time, affecting growth in the developed countries, resulting in their belief that it's necessary to, in some sense, onshore as opposed to onshore manufacturing production. And because of the need, in some sense, for the United States, the hegemon, to actually restore what it thinks is an economic position which it had lost over a period of time, we have policies being put in place which are very openly protectionist. The Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, which results in a situation where, in the name of climate action, you're providing large subsidies to your domestic industrial sector, resulting in responses of a similar kind in Europe and Japan, etc. And of course, in the face of what's this perceived threat which is going to come from, or which is coming from China, you put in place a whole set of measures which are restrictive measures, protective measures with regard to the semiconductor industry, semiconductor equipment, the possibilities of your citizens or those who are resident in the United States providing services to countries like China, etc. So we're basically seeing some degree of deglobalization, which makes this perception that you would be able, not that there was any guarantee, we've had it for three decades, that you would be able to register very high rates of growth based on the external market. Now, obviously, if you are in a position where you're being forced to a certain extent by outside circumstances to actually change track, then what we have to recognize is that the challenges that are there, and which I sort of mentioned or flagged for you, are challenges which are interrelated, that you really cannot have a situation where if you have the unwillingness to actually tax in a situation of growing wealth and income inequality in order to be able to generate the resources to undertake investments in irrigation, drainage, extension services, to build infrastructure, to be in a position in which you, in some sense, provide the basis for this diversification. And unless you can address the income and in asset inequality, which actually generates for you a domestic market, because if you're going to once again begin to think of turning inward, you actually need to make the market. The failure of the earlier strategy was, despite talk about land reforms, despite the talk about progressive taxation, despite the anti-monopoly drive in rhetoric, we actually know that none of this was implemented, so that the need to create an environment in which income is distributed in a fashion where you create a mass market for manufactured consumption goods, which allows for a diversification in favor of manufacturing, didn't occur. So you really are in a situation where, unless you address that, if you're forced by circumstances to actually turn inward to a certain extent, and by circumstances I mean what's happening in the global economy, then you really have to come to terms with the fact that if at all there's going to be a policy which is going to be successful, that fundamental error, which is part of post-independence economic history, which is your belief that you can sustain high rates of growth without actually having the kind of distribution of income and a kind of employment structure which allows you to be able to get the benefits of both the mass market and high productivity, are not going to be realized. Now, the point is, to conclude, we are really in a situation where once again we see that despite the fact that there is this evidence accumulating, there are factors which are distracting attention from this kind of shift in policy which is required. And one factor, of course, which is distracting attention is this whole idea that independent of what's happening in one part of the world economy, there is another part of the world economy which is giving countries like India an opportunity, which is the transformation which all of the things which have led to the growth and protectionism in the metropolitan centers of capitalism, that they've also resulted in a situation where there's a search for a China plus one. You're basically saying that multinational firms, the international capital, is looking for an alternative location to China because of this fact, this fear that they have excessive dependence upon that economy. So that even when there is talk about trying to enhance production in India, part of the idea is to actually become a substitute hub to that of China. And of course, there are many countries competing to do that. Vietnam, for example, is getting a significant amount of relocation. And, experience is that international capital, for some reason, seems to have a fascination for ex-socialist countries. They first went to China, now they're going to Vietnam, and people talking about Cambodia, even though Cambodia is a problem location. So you have this distraction, this idea that you still can do what otherwise seems to be difficult given international trends because of the fact that there is an alternative to China which is being sought. And therefore, rather than actually looking for a strategy which makes a domestic market for you to be able, and you've got the geographical base and the population for it, but not the income for it, if you can actually get that income distribution, instead of looking at that, what we are doing is providing subsidies in large measure, not just to domestic, but also international capital in the form of things like the production-linked incentive scheme, which the idea is that, if you're talking about something like 4 to 6%, a direct transfer on incremental production, that's a huge subsidy which is being provided to capital. And the results, even after a couple of years, we know is not great. So there are new distractions. And therefore, if you look at it in terms of what is likely, the picture is not, and particularly given the hype about GDP growth rates, the picture of a transformation is not something which is positive or optimistic. But on the other hand, if within even the sort of institutional framework we have, something has to be done, it has to begin with the possibility of trying to create an expansion of the domestic market through a strategy in which, at the bottom of which has to be an effort to try and combine an attack on income and asset inequality with a greater willingness of the state to mobilize a share of the surplus in order to expand expenditures. So that's some broad remarks on Indian economic policy going forward that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar has focused on the economic policy, and that there is the requirement of the manufacturing sector, especially for providing the employment. Let me add something. If you would divide India since 1950 to till date, in terms of the decadal growth, the first decade from the 1950 to 1960, at that time the inflation of India was almost 1.78 and growth rate was around 6. So real GDP growth rate was also positive at that time. And over the period, if you will compare the growth rate of the GDP and the inflation, and in terms of the real GDP was almost negative for almost period, but somehow it was positive. The thing is that the Indian economic policy has shifted from the government-centric plan to the private-centric plan, and there was a number of the problems that the India is being facing. So this economic policy is being discussed. The thing is that India has to provide and use reap the benefits of the demographic transition that India is getting. So and the number of the working population, especially for the youth, that has become more, and it is the right time for India to reap the benefit of the demographic dividend. So this economic policy that we are going to discuss, we shall be discussing in terms of the more in details. So now I would like to invite Professor Arun Kumar sir, so he will give us an insight of this economic policy. Sir, please.
Thank you, Shakti. Thanks to the Alumni Association for inviting me here to talk on this topic. It's, as CPC said, it's a very vast topic. Economic policy in India and the way forward. But I suppose when the organizers decided to frame this topic, they probably had something in mind. So there are several ways of looking at this topic, as I can see. We can talk about current policies. We could also talk about how these policies have emerged historically, because that's also policy making. Given the policy that we are currently having, where are we headed? And Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar did point towards that. Also, given the situation today, what needs to be done? Because we are facing many kinds of crises today. He's mentioned inequality as one, the lack of demand, the global situation changing. I'd add to that, the cryptos coming, the artificial intelligence, adding to the problems that are going to be confronting us soon. So there are environmental problems. We see extreme weather events coming very rapidly. So environmental issues are also major issues that need to be looked at in the future. So what needs to be done if we are to take into account the kind of challenges that are coming up? And I want to also say that, nothing sort of emerges immediately. There is a history behind what the policies are. So we also have to look at the historical context within which we are discussing policy. And that is important because oftentimes we forget the history, why we chose certain policy things at a certain point of time. There are certain contexts within which policy is decided, and that context keeps changing. So even when there are sharp changes, even then there's a context within which that has happened. So what I like to do is like to look at it in a historical perspective, starting from independence, because there is a kind of a continuity since the time of independence. So at the time of independence, the country had major problems of poverty, illiteracy, ill health, and so on. The situation was rather bleak. The rate of growth in the first 50 years of the last century was very low. That needed to be accelerated. Investment and savings rates were very low in the 50s, and that needed to be taken into account. So in a sense, the situation from which we began was a rather dismal situation. Policy making as it was in, say, 1950, that had two aspects to it. The first was that underlying the framework of policy was that the individual is not to blame. It's the system which has to correct for the policies. Poor people could not provide schools for themselves, or could not provide dispensaries for themselves, could not provide education or employment. So we decided as a collective, we have to do this. And therefore, the state was given a large role. So one of the things that we need to understand why the state was given a large role was because of the situation in 1947 as we got it from the colonial rule. The second aspect of the policy making then was that we saw that the Western modernity, and the elite policymakers decided that we have to jump onto this bus of Western modernity. Very quickly, we have to get onto it. So we have to copy Western modernity. So in other words, copying Western modernity, and there were two paths of Western modernity that were available, the Soviet path on the one hand, the Western path of the market economy. So we decided to go for a mixed economy model with a large public sector, because that was given the leading role, the state was given the leading role in solving the problems. So this mixed economy model began from the 50s onward with the state leading. Nehru said that these are temples of modern India, large factories, dams, etc., etc. So there was an idea that there would be a trickle down, that there would be a development of the modern sector, and then there would be a trickle down to the lower levels, to the poor people, and the backward sector would get absorbed. Slowly and slowly, as the advanced sector expands, the backward sector would disappear, and that would absorb this. But what happened was that though there was a lot of progress, I mean, whether you look at education, health, production structures, diversification of the economy, all this happened. But the trickle down was very little. And because of that, we had various problems. So the political system that we had of democracy, there, every segment realized that they were not getting the gains, and therefore there's a fragmentation of the political structures over a period of time. So in the 60s, you saw the Congress breaking up, newer parties emerging, whether it be Charan Singh's party, whether it be the other parties that emerged. And slowly there's a fragmentation. Every segment thought, unless we take care of our people, we are not going to get gains from this development path. So there's a fraying of the political consensus that emerged. Simultaneously, what happened was, there's a very large black economy that started developing. And this black economy was a means of making gains over and above what you could do through the legal means. So therefore, there's a drive to increase profits by resorting to the black economy. Now, this black economy therefore affected all our macro variables, whether it be savings, investment, whether it be export, import, and so on. And therefore, I call this the missing dimension of policy making. Because in policy making, whether you look at RBI's policies, whether you look at policies of the Ministry of Finance and so on, this black economy dimension was not taken into account. And therefore, I call it the missing dimension of policy making. And each section of population was trying to do that. So crony capitalism developed. So crony capitalism started developing in the Indian system. Now, simultaneously, what happened was, if you look at the historical context, that the global context was also changing. From the mid-70s, Soviet Union was in decline. China had a 180-degree turn where Deng Xiaoping came and he said, how does the color of a cat matter? It has to catch mice. So it doesn't matter how we grow, whether we follow socialist policies or capitalist policy, we do. So in a sense, what happened was that there was a pressure on policy in India also to change. We had emergency that came in 1975-76, and there was a rightward drift that started taking place in economic and social policies from the mid-70s. So in a sense, what happens is that in the 80s, we have the Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus actually begins to play its role. So Washington Consensus was about letting the markets have their role. So rather than the state, it is the markets that now have to move forward. So policy making was shifting away from state to the markets. Okay? So there was this discussion that was going on at that time between the state and the market, what was better for India, etc. So in 1991, what happened was that we had a balance of payment crisis. We had several balance of payment crises even before that. In 1980 also, when Mrs. Gandhi took over, there was a balance of payment crisis at that time because oil prices had risen. There was also food shortage because of agriculture, crop failure. So there was a crisis. We went to IMF and they imposed conditionalities on us. And with these conditionalities, then what happened was we liberalized our imports. We allowed consumer goods to come in. So the phase of consumerism in India begins from 1982 with Asian Games. You had the color television, you had the Maruti car, you had the white goods and all coming in. And suddenly the foreign debt, which was about $10 billion in 1980, by 1988, 89, it had become $93 billion. And because short-term borrowing was increasing after 85, 86, we could not repay because credit rating went down. And therefore, we were in a crisis. And then in 1991, when we went to IMF World Bank, we had to follow conditionalities, and that was the start of the new economic policies. So the new economic policies, the framework changed. The framework in 47 was that the individual is not to blame for her or his problems. But in 1991, the framework of the new economic policies was a different paradigm. It was that the individual has to take care of his or her problems. The collectivity doesn't have to take care. So everything, you had to go to the market. So if you wanted employment, go to the market. If you want education, go to the market. If you wanted health, go to the market. So this is what I call the marketization phase of the Indian economy's policy making. That it is the markets which advance, the state retreats. So in a sense, it was believed that markets are objective and state or society is subjective. And therefore, the society retreats, the markets advance. So the policies that we enforced after 1991 were based on the idea that we have to have market-friendly state intervention. So it was not a complete retreat of the state. It's a strategic retreat of the state in favor of capital. So you see a lot of changes that are taking place. And one of the things that happens is that the international finance capital, working through IMF, World Bank, etc., is able to dictate policies, the Washington Consensus policies that India has had to follow. WTO came, we signed in Marrakesh in 1994, April, and then it started from January 1, 1995. And those policies are also policies which are actually marketizing the economy. So this marketizing the economy, what does it imply? It implies that market principles penetrate into all social institutions. So therefore, what happens is that this process of marketization, here the marginalized get more marginalized because the market is not friendly to the needs of the common people, those who don't have incomes. As Samuelson said in his basic textbook, it operates on dollar vote. So if you have $1 million, you have 1 million vote in the market. If you have $1, you have 1 vote. It's not based on one person, one vote, so it doesn't go with the principle of democracy of one person, one vote. So in a sense, these policies which are marginalizing the marginal, they result in inequities rising rapidly. And what's the evidence of that? Savings rates goes up very dramatically. Tax collections start rising, okay? Because the well-off segments which pay the taxes. So the rise in the tax GDP ratio, rise in the savings and investment rate, those are actually signatures that inequality is increasing rapidly in the economy. Now, as a result, rate of growth speeded up after 2003. But the problem is that instabilities also rise because with inequality, the problem of demand comes in. Unless you have an external market which is enabling you to grow, the problem begins to multiply in the economy, and therefore instabilities start increasing. So economic fluctuations, political and social uncertainties, these begin to rise. The black economy continued to increase. My own paper in EPW, I showed that it had increased from 1955, 56, when Caldor had come to India. It was 4 to 5% of GDP. And then it rose to 7%. If you look at Vanchu Committee, NIPFP committee of which I was a member, it had gone to 18 to 21%. And I showed that by 2012, it had risen to 62% of GDP. So it becomes huge. So its impact on savings, investment, and all the parameters, that's very large. Along with this, flight of capital has increased. The flight of capital means that a poor country is exporting capital. So it's not that we are simply getting capital, but we are exporting capital. So a very poor country is exporting capital. And how does it happen? It happens because of the financial global architecture. There's a global financial architecture which operates through 90 tax havens. There are 90 tax havens in the world through which you can move funds out through what's called the process of layering. So the process of layering allows you to hide the way you move funds out of the country. So therefore, what's happening is that cronyism has got intensified further in this period. So it was thought that, with the liberalization, with the opening up of the foreign exchange markets, etc., the flight of capital would decrease, that the funds going out would decrease. But actually you find more and more of hawala taking place, more and more of funds going out. You have the phenomenon of, these leaked papers, whether it's Paradise Papers, Panama Papers, whether it be the British Virgin Island Papers. They're all showing that the well-off, the rich, the capitalists, the politicians, the judges, and so on, they're all spiriting capital out of the country. So a very poor country is exporting capital. Now, the next issue that needs to be taken into account, apart from the black economy, is that India has a very large unorganized sector. The unorganized sector employs 94% of the workforce, the organized sector employs 6%. And this is unprecedented because no other major economy has such a large unorganized sector. That's why no other economy did you see during the pandemic such a mass migration from the cities to the rural areas. You only saw this in India. You didn't see it in Brazil, you didn't see it in China, you didn't see it anywhere else. So this unorganized sector, which has dramatically increased, or rather remained at about 94%, its output is about 45%, the organized sector produces 55%. So I call this the colonization of the unorganized sector, because demand is shifting from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. So organized sector has been growing at the expense of the unorganized sector. And the reason is that the investment is concentrated in the organized sector. I had done a paper way back in 2008 where I showed that 80% of investment was going to the organized sector. And 6% is working there. So for 6%, there's 80% investment. And for 94%, there's 20%. And in agriculture, where they're about 45%, there you're only getting 5% of the investment. So for 45%, you have 5% investment. For 6%, you have 80% of the investment. And the balance is the residual, which is going to non-agriculture, unorganized sector. So therefore, there's a problem in all the sectors because organized sector is highly mechanized and automated, doesn't generate enough employment, and that's why only 6% remain in that sector. The unorganized sector, where actually you have larger amount of investment, that's where the large amount of employment, the investment is very low. So inequalities continue to rise. Now, the other issue that is associated with this is that the GDP data, which is supposed to capture the production of these sectors, that is flawed. And why is that flawed? Because the unorganized sector data is not available. And therefore, you proxy the unorganized sector with the organized sector. Now, organized sector is rising, the unorganized sector is declining. So you're proxying a declining sector with a rising sector. And therefore, the GDP data is incorrect. And especially after the shocks to the economy, in 2016, you had the demonetization, which actually disproportionately affected the unorganized sector. Then in 2017, you had the GST, which again impacted the unorganized sector. And then in 2018, you had the NBFC crisis, which again affected the unorganized sector. And then in 2020, you have the lockdown, sudden lockdown, which again impacted the unorganized sector. So the unorganized sector is not recovered. So our data is basically representing the growth of the organized sector. And if you look at the methodology as given in the 2017 document of the government on measurement of GDP, you find that there are 38 subsectors of the unorganized sector. Of the 38 sectors, 29 are measured using the data from the organized sector. So that proves the point that I'm making. But you can also see this in the data that's available, whether it be the growth of e-commerce at the expense of the neighborhood stores, whether you see the textile sector, the leather goods sector, whether you see the pressure cooker industry and so on. The reports from all these FMCG, etc., that market share is shifting toward the organized sector away from the unorganized sector. So therefore, your GDP data is very, very incorrect. Now, in a sense, what is happening is we have invisibilized the unorganized sector and data. It's not being captured by data. And therefore, policy also doesn't need to do anything special. Because policy says we are the fastest growing large economy. But actually speaking, if you correct for this problem that I'm suggesting, we are only growing at about 1 or 2%. So we have not become the fifth largest economy, and we are not about to become the third largest economy, as the government says. But in the government's perception, we are already doing very well, and therefore nothing special needs to be done. So it's invisibilizing the unorganized sector, both in terms of data and in terms of policy. Now, as a result of all this, because unorganized sector employs 94%, our unemployment situation is acute. But in India, our unemployment figures don't reflect the true unemployment, for the simple reason that there is no unemployment dole. So if you lose a job, it's not that you can wait to get a job. You are very poor, you have to do something. So we produced a report on employment and unemployment last year, where we showed that 320 million Indians have some kind of proper job, 280 million don't have proper job. Because there are four kinds of unemployment we identify. One is straightforward, you're looking for a job, not finding a job, you're called unemployed. Then you are underemployed because you go to the market, you don't get 40 hours of work, you get 10 hours or 12 hours. The employment definition is if you get 1 hour in a week, you're employed. But clearly you're underemployed if you get only 1 hour a week. Even if you get 24 hours or 36 hours, and 8% get less than 24 hours of work and 16% get less than 36 hours of work. So those are underemployed people. And then you have disguised unemployment in agriculture. And then you have the people who have stopped looking for work altogether. And that's why your labor force participation rate is very low. So these four together, they add up to 280 million. So our problem is how to provide jobs, proper work for these 280 million. And along with that, the question is how many young people are entering the market every year for work. So Bibek Debroy and others from the government says we need only 5 to 8 million jobs because the rate of population growth has decreased. But the rate of population growth today is not material for the people who are entering the workforce today. Those who are 15 years old, 15 years earlier, they have to be counted. So when we did that counting, we found 27 million people are entering the workforce in the age group of 15 to 29. And out of them, 25% women will not actually do a job because of social reasons. So we subtract that and we get to a figure of 24 million. So we need a backlog of 220 million who have to be 280 million and 24 million every year. So the problem is acute because the organized sector is generating only 500,000 work every year. Now, what is the government strategy in all this? The government strategy is what I call the twin strategy. On the one hand, create chaibos, Daewoo, Hyundai, big conglomerates, into all the different sectors. So we have Adani, Ambani, Tatas. They're being allowed to enter all the different sectors, to make them very large. On the other hand, keep 80 million poor and turn them into labhartis. Give them gas, give them, computer, give them, cycles, give them money for agriculturists, and so on and so forth. Okay. So 80 crore you have labhartis, and you can keep saying at the time of election that we are giving so much this thing. So politically you take advantage of that. The result is massive growth of inequality in the economy because you have these wealthy people. So at a very low per capita income, we have the third largest number of billionaires. That can only show that we have a large problem ahead of us. So this twin strategy, this problem of lack of demand, which Professor Chandrasekhar had already mentioned, growing inequality and the lack of demand, that is posing challenges going ahead. What are the kind of challenges that are coming ahead? As I already mentioned, technical change is intensifying. With ChatGPT coming, large learning models coming, unemployment will be at a very high level. Even call centers, BPO jobs are going to disappear. Not only semi-skilled jobs, but even skilled jobs are likely to disappear with the coming of ChatGPT and the way these large learning models are moving jobs of doctors, jobs of engineers, etc., architects, even painting, sculpture, those are also on the line. So therefore, in a sense, given the kind of education we have for vast bulk of the population, there will be people who will be left out of any kind of work in the coming years. So cryptocurrencies are coming, which is going to change the way we do our macroeconomics, because banking will be affected by cryptocurrencies. CBDCs are already there, the central bank digital currency, So CBDCs are affecting already. If crypto rises again, with the rise of crypto, crime will also rise, because it's difficult to track people. So illegal payments, hacking, and all that is going on. India suffers from inadequate R&D, because R&D, which actually makes you dynamic. We spend 0.7% of GDP on our R&D, whereas China spends around 3%, and its size of the economy is 5 times ours. So China is spending roughly 25 times more on R&D than India is doing. Therefore, we went to sign RCEP. On the last day, we didn't sign, because we realized that RCEP would be dominated by China. And we didn't want to be dominated by China. But the problem is, by staying out of RCEP, we are doing ourselves a disservice, because we have to trade with the same nations. So whether we stay in RCEP or we outside RCEP, either way we suffer. We are trying for trade agreements with Britain and other countries. And the problem is, again, technology. Because we lack the technology, we're not able to bargain well for our interest. So, in a sense, what we need to do today is to be careful about the coming 5 years. Is going to pose a huge technological challenge, apart from the economic challenges, apart from the global problems that are coming, the domination of the international finance capital on our policy making. So the road ahead is, I think, likely to be more difficult than what we've seen in the past 5 years. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thanks, Professor Arun Kumar Shah. You have discussed about the economic policy that is related to the market-oriented. That's true. But among these difficulties, India has achieved the 5th rank. And India is expecting to be #1 country in around 2047. And India is expecting to be the declared as a developed economy. So, being a declaration of the developed economy, any economy needs the per capita income of $22,000. But currently, India has only $2,500. So, say there is a huge gap for getting the declaration of the developed economy. And second is the HDI. So, if you talk that at the global level, #1 country, #2 UK, USA, then China, then Japan, then Germany, and 5th India, 6th UK. We have defeated India, but that was in terms of the nominal terms. But if you comparison in the terms of the per capita income, the per capita income of India is $2,500, but of the China it is $9,000. So there is a huge gap between India and China. It is true that India is going to face the problem of various problems globally, locally, and so on. But among these problems, India has to manage. Because if you see the share of the government in the total expenditure of any economy in the world, that is not going to more than 22%. In the USA, it is just 17%. In the case of the India, it is just 12.3%. And since 1950 to today, the share of the government in the total expenditure is total income that is increasing from 6.6% to the 12.3%. So it is the responsibility of us. If you will calculate y is equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m, so share of the c is around the 58%. Share of the I is 33%. And share of the G is the 12.3%. So it is the limitation of the government. That's why I would like to add here that it is the responsibility of yours, it is responsibility of me, and it is the responsibility of whole. Not only the government has to play a facilitation role, and it is our duty to how to manage, how to decrease the inequality that we are facing today. So in continuation of the discussion, let us invite Shuma Athri. Please come on the deck.
Good afternoon, and many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak here today. I am an alumnus of the 85 to 87 batch of CESP, and I haven't really had that much to do with the center apart from connections with colleagues and so on. I have traversed a long way. I trained as an economist, but then worked for a while on technology and technology management strategy. I taught in a business school. I went back to economics department. So I wouldn't call myself an economist in the same mold as let's say CP or CPC or Arun Kumar, but I'm a trained economist. And of course, what I learned in CSP during my very formative years have played a huge role in my thinking about the world and the way that I view policy. So I know the topic of today's discussion is India's economic policy going forward, and I'm pretty sure that there are big challenges ahead. But what I'd like to reflect on today, as we are all alumnus of the center, is what are the learnings from what we did in the center that might help us to understand this policy landscape and the challenges that lie ahead. So when I joined CESP in the 80s, we were on the cusp of liberalization, though of course none of us knew it at that time. But there was this very palpable sense that I'm not sure about the hum, but there was this very palpable sense that this was a place where you could be and think whatever you wanted to think and to be, and that was quite unique in India at that time. And I think as we were also young adults,
I think that's...
Yeah. And as we were also young adults, maybe we put on different guises to explore different parts of our psyche and our aspirations. Be that as it may, this was very important in breaking the mold. So most of us had arrived at this institute being, I don't know, a model student or a not so model student, or a daughter from somewhere, or some kind of role that had been assigned to us by society. And here we were allowed to step away from that mold. I won't say break it, because many of us returned to it. But for a couple of years at least, we could shake our minds free and imagine another way to be. And that was a great blessing at that time. Also, what we learned here in the department was to see the world as some kind of canvas where theories played out. This was very evident from the works of people like Krishna Bharadwaj, Prabhat Patnaik, and Amit Bhaduri. That you could always interpret the reality according to different models, metaphors, that we were studying as students. And indeed, one of the very important exercises that was given to us, I think it was in the second year, was to read the economic survey and to interpret the statistical appendix. So, this was our chance to show to our teachers, like, what did we read in those data from what we had been taught. And this was a skill, and I think it was a way of seeing the world that stayed with me, and which should stay with us when we think about policy, because policies emerge in different contexts, but they play themselves out in a specific space. So to have the ability to envisage or to project from theoretical models to how this may or may not work is, of course, a great gift, and it's a great training. And you've already heard two examples of this in the two talks that preceded mine. But the other important thing that we learned at CESP, which has been was quite interesting for me because I had no experience of the world outside of India when I was a student here, was that good policies were often unique responses to particular contexts. So when we learned about liberation theology, we saw how socialist ideologies could be combined with religious identities to find new ways to do policy. For example, in the what we read about Che Guevara and other activists like him. We learned with great wonder about the barefoot doctors. This was a policy innovation for health, which I first learned about in JNU, not in the classes as much as in the general discussions that happened around our lessons. We learned about Mao's unique way of interpreting socialism, which was fit for peasants and for workers. And the lesson, at least that I took away from all of this, was that good policy must be something that's unique to the context that it seeks to resolve. And India too has had such good policies. I don't know in other domains, but I can speak more surely about the technology domain. So the Indian Patents Act of 1970 was a response to a uniquely Indian problem. And it was an Indian response to the problem, which is much lauded in the world. Then in the 80s, we had the technology missions, which were a unique response to the problem of technology lag in the Indian economy. And at least some people would argue that the technology missions of telecommunications laid the foundation for the later growth of the telecommunications ICT sector in India. So we have had our share of some of these interesting experiments, even going further back in history, if we think about the experiment of a Shanti Niketan or a Pondicherry. These are all, attempts at policy that were rooted in the context in which they sought to solve a problem. And I think that going forward, the policy challenge must be to nurture the climate for such experimentation and identify those things that work from these widely different experiments. But who will show this creativity and experimentation? Again, in my years at CESP, we saw both teachers and fellow colleagues engage with action in the social space, which was not confined only to academic thinking and elaboration of models, but also to actively taking part in being a solution to the problems that they saw as important. So I'm thinking about a very young Jyoti Ghosh who joined our department and was known to spend her summers teaching at this grassroots learning organization called Ekalavya, which was to try to teach those that had no access to schools. So JNU has had, and some of our colleagues in CESP left after their masters to set up this non-governmental organization and embed themselves deeply into one context. This organization was called Samaj Pragati Sahyog, SPS. And at least 3 people who were our colleagues at CESP, just a year senior to us, were involved in this. And they have been a catalyst for improving agricultural productivity and diversifying livelihoods in the little area that they chose to embed themselves in, which was Indore, Devas and Indore. So I think this is the third lesson that I took away from my time here at CSP, that maybe we are trained to look at models and to study the world in terms of certain categories and abstractions, but there's another world out there which, if we have the passion and the commitment, we could also play a part in, and that can help to inform better policy, especially in a country as diverse as ours, where no two contexts would. For every example you give of one particular a theory or a success, there would be 1,000 other different experiences. So Let me also then end with what I learned from my other education in the UK and elsewhere, and which I feel may be the biggest challenge of all for policy in India going forward. And this is the what I observed in England was that however diverse were the opinions about what should be done, there was always the sense in every institution of working towards a common public purpose. Since I have come back, I'm deeply disappointed with this aspect of our institutions in general, and I think this is going to be the biggest problem for policy going forward, the inability to find a common public purpose. So no amount of experimentation or intelligence can overcome this. And I think that if we want to take our place in the world, as we should, as a big economy and as an economy that can be a beacon of light for other developing economies, we need to develop within us this sense of public purpose. And I'd like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. In the continuation of the discussion, I would like to invite now Indranil sir.
Thank you, Professor Kumar and friends. Just to introduce myself, I graduated from CESP in 1991. We were Professor Krishna Bharadwaj's last batch, and she was not just a great scholar and a great teacher, but I think all of us remember her as a very, very great human being as well. So since leaving JNU, I have been in the markets now for over 20 years. I work as a managing director in one investment bank in Mumbai. And I thought that what I will do is talk about the interface of markets and policy, how the markets perceive India, how policy responds to markets, and so on. So I think that I will divide my part into three. First, talk of the long run, and then come to the immediate challenges, and then talk of the markets, very, very briefly. So I think that it's difficult not to be bullish about India in the long run. I myself have been writing from 2016 that India will overtake Japan as the third largest economy in the world in 2027. And the work I have done since shows that we should be about $45 trillion by 2052, maybe around $88 trillion by 2073. So by all accounts, this is going to be a large economy getting larger, a large market getting larger. So that is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that this is an economy which is in the 130s in terms of per capita income, which is again in the 130s in terms of HDI. And even with all this glorious future, it's possible that the max we will go is to where the Eastern European countries are, 40 to 75 years later. So I think that it is important to talk of the aggregate because that is how you talk of the market, and that is how you get people to invest in India, because they get access to a very large market. But it's also important to understand that this is because there are more than 1 billion people, and there is a vast difference in living standards, between India and Japan. Although, in terms of aggregate GDP, we may be the same in the next couple of years. So I think that when we look at my assumptions, I have very, very conservative assumptions of about 6% growth, 5.5% inflation, 2.5% depreciation till, let us say, 2047, and then 3% growth, 3% inflation, and about 1.5% depreciation. When we look at the drivers, I at least see three. One is the demographic dividend that is coming for us and will probably peak somewhere in 2041. So the obvious question is that what will that bring? I mean, is it going to bring the kind of burst of growth and prosperity that Asian tigers saw? Or is it going to bring the sort of social unrest that LATAM saw? As of now, my bet is on the former, in the sense that it's true that you have the demographic dividend in the poorer parts of India, but then there is a massive amount of migration that happens. India, there is a diaspora within India as much outside India, something actually I came to realize while doing a term paper for Professor Sheila Bhalla's course 30 years ago. So I think that there will be, a sort of canalization of incomes from the west and the south to the north and the east that should take care of the social angle of, what is inherently, obviously, a economy of wide disparities. The other driver, in my view, is financial deepening, and we know that as the banking system deepens, there is allocative efficiency. Right now, we are, if you look at our credit GDP ratio, that's around 50%. My projection is that goes to about 120-130% by 2052, which is where most of the developed economies are. The third area that I think will be a driver is a relatively stable rupee, because the RBI has been building very high FX reserves. Now, when I talk about these things, I get three questions. The first is, what about India's twin deficits? The second is, what about manufacturing? The third is, what about politics? So I think that India's twin deficits are here to stay. I think that we will have to live with a high fiscal deficit, given that we are a country of multiple languages, races, religions, regions. So you need the fisc to manage the social tensions in the economy. You need the fisc to undertake public investment to crowd in private investment. And at least to whatever I have seen so far, fiscal deficits in India seem to be a product of growth than a driver of growth. So you get a global shock, positive or negative, that leads to increase or fall in growth, leads to increase or fall in taxes, and therefore you get into a situation where you see the fiscal deficit rise or fall. Paradoxically, years of high fiscal deficit tend to be associated with years of relatively low yields and vice versa. The reason is that if your economy is doing well, the tax collections are high, the fiscal deficit is low, but loan demand is also so high that banks find it difficult to even fund that small fiscal deficit, as was the case, say, between 2005, 6, 7. On the other hand, if you have an economy that is doing badly, while you have a high fiscal deficit, there is also relatively weak loan demand, which means that yields still remain relatively low. Similarly, for the current account deficit, from whatever the literature I see, as long as we run a current account deficit of less than 2%, that should be fine. Given that we are importing oil, there is very little chance of reducing the current account deficit. And now, of course, there is this whole issue of electronics. But at the same time, I do also think that a country like India, which is growing, should be actually running a current account deficit and borrowing from the world than trying to go to a current account surplus and lend to the world. The second question I'm often asked is, what about manufacturing? Now, I am honestly very bearish about India's prospects in manufacturing. In 2015, when the Make in India was its peak, I had written a very contrarian report saying that buy consumption stocks rather than investment stocks because Make in India is not going to happen. And my view stems from a reading of history, where we find that emerging markets prosper when they respond to the needs of their time. So if the need for time is tin, there is a particular Latin America economy which prospers. If there's a need for cheap, labor, you had the Asian tigers. Now is the demand for services where we already are. Now, when I do my projections, I have not included, any success of Make in India, any success of PLI and so on and so forth. If that happens, maybe your ICOR goes up. As of now, I think of India as a capital accumulation story like China. Whether we get efficiencies, which produce higher growth like happened with a Korea or a Japan, we have to see. In fact, if you just do the math, if we actually are able to ratchet up to a 8% growth rate, we probably will not see depreciation because the world will invest in us, and we'll probably be crossing the US in GDP by 2052. Now, whether that will happen or not remains to be seen. That is not certainly my base case. So that's the story of and finally we come to politics. My view is that if you plot the global economic cycle and the Indian economic cycle, you will see that the global cycle more or less explains the Indian economic cycle. So obviously all governments claim credit for the boom times that they have seen. All governments blame the previous government for any bust. But I think that if you see across regimes, I've done this work from 1990 to today, you will see that every regime has seen a boom or a bust, depending on whether they're in a world that has seen a boom or a bust. So I think that in terms of economic growth, the role of Indian politics is fairly minimal. So that's the long run story. When you look at the short run, I think we have three very serious challenges this year and next year. So the most of which actually stem from the Fed. Because the Fed has been raising rates, the RBI has also had to raise rates to manage the currency. Because the Fed is raising rates and leading to a global slowdown, our external demand, exports, etc. have also slowed. So traditionally, India has tried to balance any global slowdown with, trying to stimulate domestic demand. That is something that is not a choice, not just for India, but for any emerging market at this point in time. So I think it's inevitable that the economy keeps slowing. And in fact, if you took out the base effects of certain quarters, I would think that the growth of the economy has been around 5.5%, even in the last 2 years. The third problem which we face is a rural crisis, which has got aggravated because of El Nino. And my forecast is that rural income in the Kharif season, which has just gone by, has contracted by 3.4% versus 8-9% growth in the previous seasons. And you can see that demand under NREGA is now at very high levels, and in fact higher than most recent pre-COVID years. So faced with this, I think the markets expect the government to respond with expansionary policy, which it probably has. I think the markets initially wanted a more consumption-oriented strategy, which most countries have followed. Our government has responded more with a investment-led strategy. Now, one view that the government has is that, look, public investment has a greater fiscal multiplier than public support to consumption. But then again, that comes with a lag. Insofar as rural stress is concerned, it's clear that the governments, both central and states, have very little option other than to, respond to alleviate the strain. And you can see that almost every day there is some measure or the other which is being taken. Either trying to hold the price line of vegetables, trying to, reduce stock limits of wheat, traders to increase wheat supplies, given that you don't have sufficient buffer stocks, or extending the free rice and wheat scheme for 5 years. The earliest the rural problem can get solved is the summer of next year. If the Rabi crop is good, there is certainly sufficient water in northern India, but this is a problem that will certainly remain with us for the next few months. So coming to the markets against this macro context, I would say that the three markets, when you look at equities market, when you look at the bond market and the FX market, the equities market currently is driven by a bit of the TINA factor. China is slowing down, and flows to emerging markets have come down. If you look at the returns from the US versus emerging markets have underperformed almost every time frame that you can take in recent years, post 2009. Barring the period 2005 to 2009. But right now we are in a situation where money is coming out of China because China is doing badly. A lot of it is getting withdrawn from the EM funds, but some of it is coming to India, some of it is going to Taiwan, some of it is going to Brazil. So that is a bit of a support that the markets, equity markets, have at this point in time. The other is that there has been a K-shaped recovery, as we all know, post-COVID. And therefore markets are a is world, not an ought world, right? I mean, you are not trying to look at an ideal world, you're trying to make money of what exists. So there is this focus on premiumization that, at least the richer people have money, so they will be buying the more expensive products. So let's try to get into, stocks which cater to that, rather than, stocks which are more focused on penetration to the poor. Now, in that sense, I think that a lot depends on how China swings. If there is a recovery in China, again, you will see money flowing back there because clearly valuations are very cheap there. Turning to the bond market, I think that the bond market has had its share of pain because the RBI has been raising rates. Globally, people have moved out from the bond markets. But I think the picture will change as we step into 2024 because sooner or later, I think the rate cycle will turn. If you look at real rates, today the US is probably running a real rate of 2%, which is almost close to its potential growth rate. In India, the RBI is now running a real rate of 2.5% vis-a-vis core inflation, which is also very high. So I think sooner or later you will see a turn in the rate cycle, and that will benefit bonds. In addition, the Indian government has now got listed into the JP Morgan Emerging Market Index, and that will get us about $20 billion. Finally, coming to the FX market, we think that there could be a bit of a appreciation in 2024 on a very temporary basis. Given that the dollar had strengthened a lot because the Fed was hiking rates, it's only natural that once the Fed is seen to be done, once the Fed is seen to be cutting rates, the dollar will weaken and we get a cross-currency benefit of that. The other, from a slightly more long-run perspective, I would say that depreciation, in my view, should be lower, maybe about 2.5% from about 5% earlier, because the RBI has begun rebuilding FX reserves. So there was a time in my life I worked at the RBI. At that time, Governor Jalan and Governor Reddy headed the RBI, and they initiated a strategy of building FX reserves China style, to guard against global shocks. That policy somewhere, meandered away, and we saw, India actually being termed a fragile five. I think with Mr. Das that has returned, and therefore we should see a relative stability in the rupee. So, I fully agree with Professor Arun Kumar that we are in challenging times. This does call for, very nimble-footed policy. On the one hand, there is an economy that is facing strain from not only the global factors because of a slowing world economy, but also domestically because interest rates have gone up. Real lending rates in India have gone up 1,000 basis points, if you see, from March, April 2022. So that's been a challenge. And the government is obviously, and the RBI are trying a menu of factors. Added to that has been the rural problem. And while this year it was very evident because of the El Nino, even last year we had a very bad rice crop because of poor rains in the east. So rural incomes are in stress. One angle of the higher interest rates is that the interest rates for the weaker sections of society, for small-scale industries, have gone up more than for the large-scale industries. That is because, to reduce interest rates for the small-scale industries, the RBI had linked its repo rate to interest rates to these sections. And as the RBI has had to raise rates, the interest rate burden for these weaker sections have gone up. So if you ever plot a chart of mortgage loans, general and mortgage loans to priority sector, weaker sections, you will see that overall mortgage loans are growing at 15%. Loans to weaker sections are growing at 0%. So there are imbalances that have started to build up because of these stresses. Hopefully next year is different because the global rate cycle turns, some of these problems resolve themselves. But if not, then they will only go on to pose further challenges to the fisc. There will be need for spending much more to support the economy as we go forward. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Indranil sir. So I think it is very boring session or panel discussion on the economic policy. However, we have to learn as we, number of the teachers who have taught me in 92, 94 batch, Professor Arun Kumar, CPC, they have taught me also. And some teachers are sitting, Soumya sir is teaching there, he is sitting there. He was also my teacher in the graduation level. In the continuation of the discussion of the economic policy, the thing is that who will bear the burden of this growth that is being financed by by India. Think for the tax, how much government is taking tax. Suppose 100 rupees being spent for financing the Indian economic growth. So out of that 100, 58% is being collected from the tax and 35% from the loan and 7%. It means 93% out of 100 is being taken either from the tax or from the borrowing. So 7% is being taken from the disinvestment. I want to say that whatever the being policy has been adopted by the government of India, directly or indirectly, the poor people and middle class of the people are facing most of the problem. In the continuation of the discussion, let us invite Sukanya Bose.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so I know this is the post-lunch session, and we were just discussing whether we should have kept a session like this or not, or we should have just kept it to reminiscences and more interactive. So, but unfortunately, we've planned it this way, and let's just continue for a bit, and then I think we'll open it up for question and answers. So, so I'm Sukanya. I work at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. And I was here as an MPhil PhD student in the mid-90s. 1996, I joined here for my MPhil. Let me just share some thoughts that I have. Of course, I'm deeply honored to be here as part of this very distinguished panel with two of my teachers who are sitting here and other seniors of CESP. I must start by saying that I owe such a lot to this institution, not just my formal degree and training. Unlike many of you who have had the opportunity to come for their masters, I only arrived here for my MPhil PhD. So my time here as a student was short. Of course, as a research scholar, I have had a long time here. But this department indelibly shaped my social and political outlook in a very short time. So through their excellence in teaching, guidance, their own research and prolific writing, both academic and popular writing, activism, public speaking, our teachers carved out a path for us. We as a community of students have walked on it and found our own expressions. Our teachers led by example, and that's the best way to teach. Now that I sometimes teach, I know that that is the way to go. And rather than techniques, they empowered us with relevant frameworks to make sense of the world with a degree of criticality. Most of all, and this I prize the most, is that they managed to instill in each one of us a culture of concern. We are what we are because of the teachers of CESP, and so I will begin my remarks with this note of gratitude to you. Now, Shurajit asked me to speak on social sector spending. Essentially, I work on education, so I'll combine the two to make the following 5 points. As we are all aware, India's development trajectory, as described by Stewart and Rannes in the late 1980s, is something which can be called growth lopsided. Yeah, what do we mean by that? That we have very high rates of growth accompanied by stagnant positions in as far as human development is concerned. Yeah. So high growth of GDP has gone hand in hand with poor performance in human development indicators, and therefore it gets the label of growth lopsided. Not only has our position been on human development been recalcitrant to change, we've slipped from around 116th rank, this was 1990, to 130th rank among countries of the world. This is in marked contrast to our high growth story, where we are among the fastest growing economies of the world, and I say it in quote unquote, as per the official data. This structural anomaly has been there for such a long time now that it is almost normalized today. It doesn't make people uncomfortable. Now, if we refer back to Reines and Stewart, and that was such an important paper, where they described that to create that virtuous cycle, a conscious link from growth to human development needs to be established, and that requires two things. As you would guess, it would require social investments, and it requires reduction in income inequality. We've already heard that the inequality in incomes have gone up sharply. The public expenditure on the social sector has remained in the range of 5 to 7% of the GDP in the last 30 years. How inadequately we spend is captured in one study that we did to estimate the resource requirements for right to education in India. Right to education, as we know, is a fundamental right guaranteeing every child in the age group 6 to 14 schooling of a reasonable quality. Along with a legal entitlement, right to education is a social vision and a policy document as a way forward. It describes in detail what kind of education we want for the children of this country, so as to ensure equality of opportunity for all. So we do not want mere enrollments. We want, in a meaningful sense, equality of opportunity for all. And what are the material conditions that are required for this, which are non-negotiable? Now, contrary to common perception, compliance on RT is very low, and there are enormous gaps in basic conditions of schooling. In states like Bihar and Jharkhand, teacher shortage, as per certain minimum norms, is almost double the number of working teachers. So a normative estimate meaning what is required as per the norms, vis-a-vis the actual spending, shows the need for an additional resource requirement of 1.4% of the GDP for elementary schooling alone in India. That is a near doubling of the present levels of expenditure on elementary education is what is required. Not only is the physical gap very large, it is very unevenly distributed across states. So the poorest states have the largest gaps, calling into question the existing mechanisms of fiscal federalism. Now, my next point is that this obvious inadequacy, which is so obvious to most of us, at least those of us who are looking at the data closely or have a connection with the field, however, is not recognized in the mainstream policy discourse. Every bureaucrat I speak to denies the gap, no matter if the official data itself is showing it. In marked contrast to the formal mentions of expenditure targets in written policy, that is the reference to 6% of GDP for education as in the NEP, or 2% of GDP for health, the policy discourse, and please notice I'm not talking about policy implementation, which is often referred to, but I'm referring to policy as a discourse regards public expenditure on schooling as a leaking bucket. What do I mean by that? The assumption is that one is putting money into a program or a project and nothing comes out of it. So why do we spend? So the leakage usually refers to the salary of a government school teacher who is always characterized in a certain way as a lazy and insincere. So since you are not getting the returns that you are looking for, then why spend? This discourse is focused singularly on issues of cost efficiency of public spending, and around which we have seen this massive school closures across the length and breadth of the country. School closures in the sense of school mergers. The public sector in the schooling sector is shrinking heavily. And this policy discourse comes through an arm of neoliberal paradigm called the public financial management. The emphasis is to shift the focus to outcomes, often by using finance as a bait, without addressing the structural conditions or creating the ecosystem that can really make it work. JNU is a beautiful example of how you can make it work. But now the focus is entirely on outcomes, without actually considering the processes. Apart from this micro-efficiency logic, which resists all claims of raising social expenditure, the macro logic of fiscal consolidation through FRBM manages to restrict the social expenditure. Social expenditure thus becomes only a residual category in budgeting. My fifth point regards the emergence of markets, but the markets is not, as Indranila said, but in a different context. So what fills this gap in public expenditure? It is the markets. Markets have moved in to fill the vacuum created by the retreat of the state. There's a clear streaming of students into public and private educational institutions, deepening depending on their economic status and location in the social hierarchy. We have failed to breach the link between social privilege and educational privilege. In the last 20 years, markets have also started catering to a section of those at the lower end of the pyramid, the lower end of the income distribution, through schools which are called the budget schools. At the bottom are the informal markets growing at an enormous pace, and we have done some studies on what Professor Arun Kumar just said, that invisibilized entity, which tries to measure the informal sector, because for which we actually do not have the data, and which are not even counted, and which are off the records. And it is massive. It's almost 50% of the private sector is the unrecognized sector today, and therefore the informal sector. At the bottom are the informal markets growing at an enormous pace, and on the higher end are formal educational markets, but both effectively outside regulatory oversight. The courts in their rulings are constantly reminding that education is a public good and institutions must serve public purpose. The liberal aims of education need to be upheld. So having painted this picture, then let's see what is the way forward. And of course, there are no shortcuts. To correct the growth lopsidedness, trends of growing inequality and stagnant public expenditure on social sector needs to be reversed through conscious policy choices. An enormous fiscal push is required to ensure equality of opportunity for all. At one level, this requires the state to find fiscal space for more spending. Where will the money come from is the usual refrain that we get to hear from the finance departments, or whether we go to the finance commission. At another level, of course, one must counter the dominant global neoliberal discourse that questions directly or indirectly the very existence and legitimacy of public institutions and its main functionaries. Equally important, the institutions of the state must ensure that private institutions, and there are so many now, in the social sector serve the public purpose. So this is all I had to share. Thank you.
Uh, in this continuation, without wasting our time, I would like to invite Rajesh Mahapatra sir. And at 5 o'clock, we have a cultural program. In this, there will be classical music by Dr. Malchanda Chakravarti, and there will be group band music program. So please be here at 5 to 7. There will be a cultural program. Sir.
Thank you. My name is Rajesh Mahapatra. I'm a journalist. I did my master's between 1988 and 1990. I did my MPhil in 92-94. I'm not that old. I should have been the last. I shouldn't have been on this panel. It's a panel of economists talking about economy. Surajit Das, when he circulated the first panel of speakers, I called him and I said, how can you have a 100% bong panel? Particularly when we are serving all our guests Bengali speaking fish. After that, if you have a 100% Bengali panel, it will be a little too much. So he then added my name and added a few other names. So I said, but I didn't mean that my name should be added. I should have been the last person to be on this panel. And he misheard it, that I should be the last speaker on the panel. But there is an advantage of being a last speaker. More so for a journalist. When you have such eminent economists on the panel, you can be rest assured that they have covered all the aspects. And I don't have to do anything. Particularly when a journalist, because what does a journalist do? We essentially cut and paste. And I think each one of them have given me enough to cut and paste. And I know, we were peaking at about 120, 130 in the auditorium. Now it's down to 60. So, we have lost 50% audience. That's why eminent economists are not so good for these kind of things. So I will try to keep it short. I really don't have much to say. As each one of them were talking about different aspects, and I think a lot of excellent points made, a lot of ground covered, I was thinking, why are we doing this? Why are we talking about policy? Why are we crunching these numbers, most of which are most of the times, Indranil, are meaningless, we know it. They keep changing every quarter. Of course, nowadays, every policy headline also keeps changing, every policy name keeps changing. But it's essentially, we want to see India become a great place, right? And what is that great place? Whatever policy you are talking about, whatever numbers you are crunching, we need to ask, what for? What do you want? What is that outcome, or what are those outcomes that you want? So I thought it will be good, being the last speaker, if I try to say, in my own way, what is it that I want when I think of India, or when I think of what could be a holding proposition for reimagining India? And I don't want to burden you with targets of falana $1 trillion economy by falana year, falana amount of domestic savings rate, falana amount of gross fixed capital formation. I want to put forth very simple propositions, but they are not simple to achieve. I want an India, now you set the deadline you want to set. Now it is a fashion to set a deadline, 2030, 2047, 2040, 2050, Amrit Kal beginning, Amrit Kal ending. 100th anniversary of India, maybe we'll say, let us set it for 60th anniversary of CESP, Diamond Jubilee. So what is that India that we would want to? I just have three things to say. I want to see an India that is healthy. I want to see an India that is educated. I want to see an India that is happy, where every Indian has a smile on his face or her face. Now, what does that translate into? You can then multi-layer it, whatever you want. Here is the way I see this is enough. And why do I say this is enough to aspire for? Now let's start with the first proposition, healthy India. A doctor colleague of mine once told me, very powerful words actually, if you think of it. He said, healthcare for me is how one is born, how one lives, and how one dies. Am I born healthy? Has my mother given birth to me being healthy? Has my mother gotten the support that she needed for childbearing and rearing? Has the father been an equal partner in that journey? Have other members supportively participated in that journey? Now you think about what it takes to get all that. You will figure out, then you would kind of do those primary healthcare center, iron deficiency, all that you can work out. But you will get your answer. How one is born, how one lives. Do I live a healthy life? Do I have the right work-life balance? Do I get access to healthcare that is affordable? Do we have enough health facilities where quality healthcare is accessible to everyone? Those who can pay, they go to private hospital. Those who can't pay, they have enough public hospital that are offering quality healthcare. All those answers will sort out. How I die? I want to die without worries. I want to die with a smile on my face. What does that mean? Which means I have fulfilled all my family responsibilities. I have lived a life assured of my income security. I have lived with friends, family, being around. I have had the social security that I needed. And that's when I die happily. So, your healthy India objective would translate all of those. And then there are enough Ernst & Young, McKinsey, they can do all those number crunching and all that things. I am not going to be wasting my time on that. And we should not be wasting our time on that. Because our people really don't bother, don't care. When you go down, and that is what I've been doing for the past 5 years, trying to figure out, we speak such sensible things, but why aren't people connecting to it? And then I have realized that we probably speak a very different language. We want to say that we are on the side of the poor, but we speak very complicated language. Those other set of people who also speak complicated language, but they work for the rich, and they simplify things for them and get away with it. So, I want to keep it that way. Now let me come to the second proposition. I want an India that is educated. And what do I mean by educated? For me, education is not about employment. For me, education is about empowerment. For me, education is about building responsible citizens. For me, education is about creating responsible, empathetic, social members of the society. If we look at education that way, we will then know what kind of education system we want to build. And then we will know what is wrong with what we are doing. And why I say this today, educated, because in this country today, everywhere you go, there is skill India. You know, people who got educated, reached the top of the world, they are now today very proudly talking about skilling India. I just came back 2 days ago from Odisha, and I was on a panel when the skilling secretary very proudly talking about. I said, look, 35 years I have lived in Odisha. The moment, in Delhi, the moment I tell people Odisha, half of the people ask me, where is Odisha? The other half will tell me how in Kolkata, Odias are Malis and cooks. In Delhi, Odias are plumbers. In Kerala, now Odias are better construction workers than Biharis. This is what skilling is giving you. Why do you want to skill people and not educate people? And that's where, you know, I'm just trying to link with what even Professor Arun Kumar said, the way that there is a conscious attempt. There are 300 million people who are part of the globalized class. There are 300 million, most of us would count in that, who are ranting, struggling, are clueless about where we are going. And then there are 800 million people who are today being put on the margins, given free ration, given all kinds of populist sops, and are not allowed to think. They should not get educated. They should be skilled to change nuts and bolts. And that is why I say it is very important for all of us to start talking about education again. We want an educated India first. Okay, then we'll talk about different kind of skills, not about plumbing skills. I want leadership skills. I want managerial skills. I want social skills. I want fine art skills. We don't talk about those skills because those skills will succeed rather than precede good education. So let's talk about education. And if we don't give education, for me, education is about thinking and being able to question, being able to raise the right questions. That's the society that we should be building. When everything is moving toward a knowledge society, we are talking about skilling. And we have let go of education. I don't have to labor that point. So my second ambition would be educated India. And, you know, what needs to be there already, you know, Sukanya spelled out a few things. Professor Kumar spelled out a few things. Now let's come to the last bit, which is a smiling India. So when do people sigh? When are you happy? You are happy when you know that your future is secure. You are happy when you know that your income is secure. You are happy when you feel happy. But you are also happy when you get to do what you want to do. You are also happy when you get to say what you want to say. Now, where do you get that? You get that in a democracy. Can meaningful development be delinked from democracy? Can there be happiness without democracy? I know the Bhutanese king promised that, you know, gross domestic happiness can also come in a monarchy. He defines that happiness. The happiest moments in the civilizations have come when democracy has arrived. When we talk about happiness, is about having a meaningful employment, having the dignity you so deserve in a society. So when I say smiling India, I envision an India where the roots of democracy are deepened further, not weakened. So healthy, educated, smiling India, that is how I would articulate. And I think in order to flesh this out, I think some of the excellent points that came up, you heard them, I don't have to repeat them, I don't have to hold you back. There's chai waiting, and I think there's some interesting cultural program waiting. Thank you very much. Keep coming back. We promise that next time onward, it will be more frequent that the alumni will meet. We today discovered, I'm taking 2 more minutes, just 2, because I don't know whether we'll get an opportunity, we'll repeat it. We discovered for the last 3 months, we are struggling to find volunteers to not let go of the idea of CESP, to consolidate and build on it. We have been having a tough time, but thanks to students from here that we have managed, pulled it off, in a short time against a lot of challenges. We also, I think it was announced in the group, Mr. Subbu will announce it when he's here, that the CSP Foundation got registered yesterday, and we had almost gone close to register the Alumni Association, but today morning we only learned that in 2002, actually we had gotten the association registered. It's just that the office bearers forgot about it. So now no one has a clue where the papers are. We are searching for them, and as soon as we get them, the CSP Alumni Association will be in place. Things will be a lot more organized, and next year we'll have a more robust show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. He focused on the happy index. So we are happy because we are all from the CSP. In this continuation, there will be question answer session. So questions are invited from the audience, from the panelists. There are 6 panelists, so question may be asked, and whoever with the question will ask, please introduce, and from whom you are to ask, please refer that one also. So anybody from audience, the questions are invited. No question. 1, 2.
Intelligent audience.
No, 2 are raising their hands. So please. 1 is there from this side also. I think mic should. Are you able to speak loudly? Give another one.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
So we have this demographic dividend discussion going on every time when we study Indian economy. Oh, I'll introduce myself. I'm Rosalind. I'm a MA first year student of CESP. So about demographic dividend. But there is this general appeal about government jobs, and our youth, mostly we find them, I won't say wasting their time, but they are so much into government jobs that they spend their really productive youthful days on in preparing for these government exams. So how can we cultivate this the entrepreneurship culture in our country, because there is a lack of it, and then there is also a lack of women participation. So yes, that's
So from whom you are asking question?
any of the panelists members are welcome to answer.
Mahapatra.
Yes, I think that.
Why not? That is good.
Yeah, I'm Suresh Nanda, CESP 1975-77. I think this emanates from the fact that India celebrates government job there is a sense of entitlement, there is a sense of security, and also we have a judicial system which I think is less set to better. I think I have seen when we were young, getting a scooter was difficult when we started working. Getting a telephone was difficult. Banking was difficult. Everything changed. But few things haven't changed. The sense of entitlement of the government servants and a very, very, what I would say, archaic judicial system where the corrupt don't get punished. I think that itself is the answer to the question why government jobs are being sought after. Second thing that happens is, in India, the entrepreneurs are being looked down upon. Whether it is an economic discussion, whether it is in political discussion, we talk about entrepreneurs as if they are, some of them could be bad, but they are the ones who create employment. But somehow socially, we are anti-entrepreneurial. I think unless we change that mindset, anybody who creates a job is far more important than anybody who's supervising anything. I think we have to change that mindset. Only then things will change. And I'll also add about something about Happy India. I think we talk about a lot of progress that has happened. I stay outside. I just came a few days back. We talk about wonderful roads. Yes, roads have come up pretty well, but we have lost road sense. We drive dangerously. We don't follow rules. I would say what India needs now, lot of social and other skills to be empowered so that we really progress. What is the progress are we talking about? In Delhi, where I came in 1975, you could breezing from one place to another in a mudrika in 30 minutes. Today in a big car you cannot do it in 2 minutes. So I think these aspects have to be there. I see another aspect. There is, I think we are totally also very, very conscious. How many middle class and upper middle class take the metro in Delhi? If you say I have taken metro, it is down market. Let's change our mindset. I think we talk about a lot of macro things but don't get into micro things. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just add one point to that as someone who's actually seen like both sides, worked in a government job and then moved to markets. So I will say that in a government job your downside is protected, and when you are in the private sector, while if you are good and circumstances are on your side, then you can clearly move up faster. You may also lose your job. So I think that it's but natural in a country where the social safety net is that much limited. People are afraid of moving out into the government sector. In my own case, when I was resigning my government job, one day my BP went up to 200 by something. Because everyone kept on saying that, there is a pension, there is this, there is that, why should you leave? So I think that is something that often plays on people's minds.
Can I add one small thing just to, because since I talked about meaningful employment. Yes, my friend. So, oftentimes we talk about things, which is kind of impressionistic. I don't think youth would like to work for the government if there were enough opportunities of meaningful employment in the private sector. I mean, there are people who would work for government, people who would work for private. There won't be any distinct preference for government. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Maybe it is a bit anecdotal, but I think if you get the data, it will back it up. In the first decade of this millennium, you never heard about reservation. None of the upper caste people were complaining. They stopped complaining about reservation in government jobs because they never cared. because the private sector was generating enough jobs, jobs that were seen as meaningful employment. Nobody cared. Today, for the last 1 decade, when jobs have started shrinking, the reservation topic is back on the agenda. It's as simple as that. Meaningful employment with a sense of security. Everybody wants a sense of security. Casualization has increased hugely. India Inc. is one of the, in the world, if you compare corporate classes of the developed countries and some of the developing countries, India Inc. is the least accountable class. So you have to think about that. It's not that youth just wants to go and work for the government. There are no choices. There are no options. That's when I said what it means to be happy for me is I should have choices. I should have economic choices. I should have political choices. I should have social choices. That's what the sense of the idea of development means for me.
If I can add, what Rajesh has said. Can you hear? Yes. If 6% are getting work in the organized sector, and 94% have to go into the unorganized sector, then you know what people are wanting. There's so few jobs, as Rajesh said, which are the so-called desirable jobs. And if you did the same job in the organized sector and the unorganized sector, the ratio of income is often 1:5, 1:10. So if you're a courier person, you're earning 12,000 rupees for a 12-hour shift. If you're in the government, in the post office, you'll be getting 5 times more salary. In JNU itself, you see when now all employees are on contract, the income that they get as compared to what they were getting earlier. So A, there's a shortage of jobs in the organized sector, which are the desirable thing. And B, if you lose your job in the organized sector, you go into the unorganized sector. And that's why people are preferring to go into the organized sector. And because the private sector is not generating enough jobs, not that the government is generating jobs, government is also cutting back on jobs. So people have to take the exam 4 times, 5 times, they're spending enormous amount of time just taking exams. So it's a very bad situation for the young people. As I said, 24 million people are coming into or ready to get into the job market, but only 500,000 will get the organized sector job. And that's why the issue of reservation has become very important, because even if you get a few jobs, you still want that. So the conflict amongst different groups has increased, and that's why every group is asking for reservations.
I think that student could not get the answer. Her,
Can I just add a last?
but think for her solution of that one. How the you.
No, I just wanted to say that, sorry, it's just a small, so, there have been lots of studies on entrepreneurship, and they say that people who become entrepreneurs usually have better financial wealth than non-entrepreneurs. And that may be part of the answer, that in those strains of society where there is enough wealth that they can bear the risk, there is entrepreneurship. There's a lot of entrepreneurship in my hometown of Bangalore. Everybody, my nephew has already sold 2 companies, right? So I'm not sure that what's holding back people is a love of jobs. It is a reluctance to take some kinds of risk, which is very rational, right? So if you have the assets to enable you to take the risk, either through your education or otherwise, I think there's no problem. We are also seeing a lot of entrepreneurship in IIT Delhi from our students. They don't want to go into government jobs. So because they can bank on their degree, so they have the access to the capital that will enable them to set up a business. So just, I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but I hope it explains what you see, right?
Any? Please. Give him mic, please.
There is somebody there at the back.
Yeah, I'm waiting for a long time.
Just.
In terms of economic opportunity, everybody wants a good deal, a better deal. What these young people who, one, if they are seeking a job,
as if they are seeking a supernormal profit or the equivalent thereof within that framework of a job. And unfortunately, there is a genetic coding in this country where everybody refuses to admit it for obvious reasons, but what they are looking at is a parasitical largesse within the framework of salaries. And that is what we are contending against when we are classifying the kind of jobs that people seek. It's just that that entire vast workforce would be very upset at having their reality discussed so plainly.
Thank you, sir.
Just to add, the question was,
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Rajiv Khanna, and I was in 1988-91 batch of CSP University here. Our question was a little different. Our question was a systemic question. What is systematically driving people to seek jobs? One answer is jobs are less. We got into reservation, we got into... In my mind, we have not been able to create a fair market institutional environment where entrepreneurship is rewarded. It is cronyism that is rewarded, it is corruption that is rewarded. So that is why people are a little reluctant to those people who are really innovative, those people who are really motivated. They would rather go and try their entrepreneurship in other countries rather than try in this country. So for instance, Indians moving out to India, out to US are best of the entrepreneurs. There are many people who are doing very well. In India, the people are not, the entrepreneurship is not rewarded because those who do not want to be cronies, they tend to be left behind. So what we need to understand is the institutional, our political class, character of our political class, character of our institutional environment, which does not reward the entrepreneurship. That's what my thought is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Let me introduce myself. I am Ashish Turudel. I did my MA from CSP way back in 81-83. I have a very simple questions, kind of a puzzle. I teach in a college and I have to face undergrads. And these days, the students are pretty militant. If you can't answer their questions, you're almost thrown out. It's not that someone asks me a question and I couldn't answer. It's kind of something what I'm thinking in my mind, and this is the best place where I can ask. First thing what I've noticed, in our earlier traditional textbooks on Indian economy, there's a fairly good material on land reforms. Now these days, it is completely chucked out. Now I have a problem here. To my mind, without land reforms, no agricultural transformation could be successful. And if this is so, then no economic development can take place. It's as simple as that. Please correct me if I have got my basics right. Now we can see we have tried our whatever ways, little ways we could implement our land reforms. It was not a success. Still, someone would say, look, fine, we couldn't manage land reforms. It's only in 2 states they are successful. Others, nothing happened as such. But still, see, we are marginally exporting. Now, does it mean that we have to redo our basics? Does it mean that what we all learned, basic economics, it's all wrong? I don't think so. I mean, I am just, see, my question is this. This is a major flaw, I mean, I would say, land reforms is deleted. Because land reforms is deleted, because you couldn't do anything about it, even certain things about land reforms we did not do, even when they are not politically sensitive. And it is because of this, farmers are dying. And I don't think, I mean, it's a dilemma. To my mind, we cannot do anything if we do not do land reforms properly. Now, perhaps we cannot go back. It is deleted from our textbook, so much so that nobody thinks about it. So I don't know. For me, the solution lies in the countryside. For me, the solution lies in transforming agriculture. And I don't think, personally, I'm very, very confused. And I still don't want to give up my basic understanding of economics that, we have managed with land reform, so let us continue to do without land reform. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, Any other question?
Generally, we say that economics, when two economists are there, there should be three. So what I am telling that, really speaking, economists as a academician, we have failed, frankly speaking. Because until and until we have a practical exposure to trade, industry and finance, our theory will not work. And that is what I am telling, I have written myself and I found it, that why demonetization was a failure, because it was a wrong place surgery. Because economists were thinking that the money was hoarded. Actually, it was not hoarded. Actually, the currency has gone up because of under-invoicing Chinese import, which has to be financed by cash only. So that is why the cash intensity has gone, despite your digitalization. Second thing, which is very critical, second thing is that during 2004 to 2008, which was taken to be a golden period of growth, but I have written also and it has been published, it was not a golden growth period because it was simply it was circulation of surplus flow of credit, surplus flow of fund. It was flow from commercial banks were giving credit at sub-PLR rate, and that was routed to as a fixed deposit in the bulk deposit. So actually they were arbitrage, but CSO was calculating corporate investment according to financial growth, not its use. It has been amply proved because 2004 to 2008, the corporate sector investment in fixed deposit of companies has increased from 3% to 17%. It was a 28% increase. How can you have it become a lender to the banker? So naturally what is happening is that we as a theorist, I mean, it is not in India alone. You see the 2008, it was all your federal governor and everybody was telling the economy is doing very well. They could not see the crisis, even it was happening that time. So naturally what my thinking is that unless and until you have a practical understanding, then it is, I will tell you one story small. There was in UP, there is a sugar cane production is there. So वहाँ पे क्या होता है कि अगर गुड़ मतलब शुगर कैन का जूस नहीं होता है ना, तो उसमें कहते हैं गुड़ नहीं लगा अभी इस बार. So somebody like me who was educated, this one went to their father, yes, गुड़ तो नहीं लगा. They see it गुड़ लगा है जैसे कोई पेड़ में लगा होगा. So this is the conditions economists as long because world over economists. Why so many theories are there but still the economies are not doing well? Why there is because we are see here itself on the same topic there will be n number of opinions. So naturally we have to build the theory along with the exposure to the trade, industry and finance. Thank you.
So one thing I would like to request that this, sir, please. This is the question answer session, so please ask very shortly.
Hello?
Very short. Well, that is enough, so no further question. You want more? So no more question, please.
Excuse me? Sir?
Huh?
Hello, can I ask you one question? Hello, myself Prasad. I have two questions. My first question is, like 3 years back or 2 years back, both that Sri Lanka and Pakistan were facing very huge crisis. Everyone observed that. But still in HDI rankings, India was ranking less than compared to those which are facing crisis. What is wrong with HDI? Is the HDI wrong? Which supports those countries which are actually lagging behind and facing crisis and ranking India less than those countries which are there. My second question is about the growth projections of India. And see, recently I read an article in which they mentioned that our Indian economy is growing so fast. Like At current, ours is 4 trillion, economy reaching 4 trillion soon. I am just comparing it with 2018. I was living my life with my spending with half the money which I spend today, and at the time it is like around 2 trillion. Now it is 4 trillion. The prices and the expenses that I made was like almost double. Is the GDP really grown? Is my second question. My first question is that why why the countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan, which are facing crisis, are ranking better than us in HDI? Is this the part of HDI? Or else, yeah, thank you.
Sir, I have one short question, if I could ask. Here.
As a
Yeah, just a short question. Firstly, I want to thank all the panelists for their insightful words. And my name is Adhikant. I'm a student of CSP in my second year right now. My question is to Professor Arun Kumar, sir. Sir, you've highlighted the problem of the black economy and the unorganized sector. And so when demonetization was carried out, one of the stated objectives was to limit black money. And according to RBI reports themselves, the amount of cash in circulation has actually gone up to the level that it was back then. And we find that the use of tax havens has also persisted, if not increased. So my short question is just how do we address the problem of the black economy, and how do we reduce the absolute magnitude of the unorganized sector through practical steps? Thank you. Thank you.
So no further question, please. Let us answer.
We can discuss it at the tea time.
Okay, thank you. So now there is an announcement regarding the scholarship. So for announcing the announcing the related to the matters related to the scholarship, I would like to invite Nandan and some. Please come, sir. Thanks